Okay, guys, I have not had an actual episode of my American President's Reading Challenge since January of 2021, which is basically like last year. It was really early in January, and that to me is kind of depressing. I've been doing so many supplemental videos because those are easier for me to get a hand on. I've been going a little bit further afield, and actually when I went to film this video, I had a choice between filming this or like 2 other supplemental videos if I keep to my 5 books a video thing. So wow. I am getting there. I don't have that many presidents left, and the problem is that acquiring these novels on particularly CD audiobook is getting harder and harder. I like to listen to a CD audiobook in my car. I've exhausted almost all of the e-audiobook options, and it's really hard for me to read nonfiction in a physical form. But I think at this point, it's what's gonna have to happen. But I've got 5 titles for today that I did listen to and, or read actually. One of them I did read for a reason I will explain, but we have 4 very recent presidents-ish and then 1 very not recent president, and we're gonna start with him. These are not in the order that I read them, they're in chronological time order of their presidency. So starting off, I read my James Monroe. It was called James Monroe, A Life by Tim McGrath. I do not want to go over this like a ton because this was an amazing experience. I got to do a buddy read with Josh from Literary Gladiators, who, besides being the top most incredible supporter of this channel, is also super into president books. And at the time, this book was a new-ish release, and he suggested that we do a buddy read, and that was absolutely incredible. I obviously have not done that for this challenge. I've had books that I've encouraged other people to read in my orbit, but this was the first time reading one at the same time. It was very interesting. Josh and I both had very different views. I believe he rated it 4 stars on Goodreads and I gave it 2. I will say, and this is the magical thing about a buddy read, was that when discussing it with Josh, I do feel like I had more respect for some of the stuff that happened in this book. The thing was that for me, it was just so slow and very dry. Tim McGrath often does naval histories, and so when you got to the little parts in this where there were like war things happening, we got a serious description of tactics and where the troops, blah, blah. But it felt like a biography of James Monroe's time and not necessarily of the man. Now, James Monroe did not leave a lot behind for us to extrapolate from, so there is also that. But I felt dry, I felt distant, and it was very, very long. Very long. So it wasn't like super duper enjoyable, but I'm so glad that I read it, and I'm so glad that I got to read it with Josh. It was just an incredible experience, and you know what? So the book wasn't that great. The people are, and that's what's important. Skipping way down the line of presidents, because James Monroe was somebody I had to go back for, we are at Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter is having like a really good time with books right now. People are finally deciding that he's not, dead yet at the filming of this video, but his life, he's slowed down enough where people can finally write books about his entire presidency. Jimmy Carter is a huge author of his own books, some of which have chronicled his presidency, but this year is really the first time collective biographies are starting to come out. And I read what has thus far been considered the best of that bunch, which is his very best, Jimmy Carter, A Life by Jonathan Alter. It was so interesting to read one of these books that has been published during and after the Trump presidency. Oftentimes these books have not been published in the last couple of years when I'm reading them, and being able to take the effects of, Jimmy Carter's presidency or policies or things that were stopped or started and taking them all the way through to our very present moment was really fascinating, and I really enjoyed that aspect of the book, and it made me wish that like I had a brand new biography for every single one of these more recent presidents, where we can really extend out the view as far as we can of the effects of their presidency. Historians at this point are just beginning to say that we can have a decent amount of historical perspective on Carter and Reagan. Anything after that, it's too soon. So, you know, take all that with a grain of salt, but being able to like bring these things into our present moment was really fascinating. The thing I disliked about this biography was that it gave very short shrift to the front of his life. I felt like that was gone over very quickly. And then when it gets to his presidency, like we've been going along chronologically in time order, but when it gets to his presidency, it begins to go chronologically by issue. And what do I mean by that? I mean, so this is the first issue that he tackles, and let's say it's, you know, peace in the Middle East. And then it follows that all the way through to like the end of his presidency, the end of his life. It extends that way. And then it backs up, and then it says, okay, the next thing that he decided to focus on was green energy. And here's what he did, and here's how it goes forward. So I began to lose, especially because I was listening to this on audio, I began to lose track of where we were like chronologically in his life, because it begins to just get very extended and, you know, forward and backward, and things repeat. And it's just, especially on audio, when I couldn't look at the pages to orient myself, it began to feel very, very choppy. And I was a little bit disoriented by who was what, was when, was why. So I didn't like that aspect of it, but I really enjoyed the book, and I would definitely recommend it to people who are interested. I've obviously not read some of these other Jimmy Carter biographies that have come out. This one was amazing. It was really good, and to just see the full historical perspective to our current moment was just really fascinating. So really enjoyed that. Super fun and exciting there. My camera overheated and shut down, so if the lighting is different, if the angle is a little bit different, sorry. This is my life. Anyway, carrying on. So after Jimmy Carter, there is of course Reagan. The Reagan biography that I read was Reagan: An American Journey by Bob Spitz. This is a little bit of an interesting case where knowing what the other work the biographer has done kind of helps. This is an eminently readable book. It's really long, but it flows, and by the end, when, you know, Reagan gets Alzheimer's and is reaching the end of his life, you're like, oh my god, I feel things after this incredibly long biography, which is hard to do in books that are like 700, 800 pages. The thing, though, is that Bob Spitz is a biographer of people. Most of his other work has been on actors, actresses, musical figures, people for whom it is important more than, say, a political biography to really feel invested in the person. I'm not saying I don't want to feel invested in the person when I read these biographies, but I also want to get a political understanding, a academic understanding of things they did during their presidency. And because Bob Spitz is very focused on giving you the person Reagan was, and Reagan himself had a very powerful personality, it felt, when I got to the end, I was like, oh my goodness, that was incredible. But I have much less grasp on the political implications of his presidency, as opposed to like who he was as a person and how he got where he was in his life and how he reacted to the crises that he came up to. So it's not a bad book. I gave it 4 stars on Goodreads, but if the goal is more of that academic understanding, it's not really going to get you where you need to go. And especially as I've been reading more and more about things that have implications that kind of start for a lot of people or are really aggravated by the Reagan presidency, I really, really really wish that this book had done that a little bit more. It's just seeing as like a bigger and bigger gap in this book as I've read forward. And I do mean that from both sides of the aisle. A lot of things about the modern Republican Party kind of happened in this time, which are really important. And of course, you know, Reagan is the president they often seek to, you know, make themselves seem like. And then of course there's a lot of issues in our modern society that Democrats often lay at the feet of Reagan. So just not having really a better understanding of those decisions and focusing more on Reagan the person might be what you are looking for in a biography, but it's not what I was looking for. So a great book, a well-written book, an incredibly I don't want to say heart-wrenching book, but it just got attached to my heartstrings a little bit in a very long book, but not helpful as much for understanding the Reagan presidency. So after 8 years of Reagan, we get 4 years of his vice president, the first Bush, George Herbert Walker Bush. For his biography, I read what is currently considered like the top line, not written by a family member, which is Destiny and Power, The American Odyssey of George Herbert Walker Bush by John Meacham. I was fascinated by the idea of this book because Meacham is a centrist Democrat, and I've read his other stuff. I have a really, really big love-hate relationship with John Meacham's work, and I was really curious to see how he would handle George H.W. Bush. Once again, this is a book that has issues because his presidency is, in terms of historical perspective, so recent. But this was written in the 20-teens, and that does mean that it has things like there were people who felt that George H.W. Bush's handling of the fall of the Berlin Wall, you know, he wasn't dancing on top of the Berlin Wall, that this was a problem, and he wasn't being effusive enough. But now people are beginning to see in hindsight that his very stoic handling of the fall of the Berlin Wall and the fall of the Soviet Union really helped that empire kind of collapse in a whisper, as opposed to, you know, potentially causing some world-shattering calamities. So there are things like that that are brought into perspective. But I think the major thing about this book is that, once again, it had a very similar issue to the Bob Spitz. It was very focused on Bush the person. And I do feel like this book was impacted by the fact that at the time, Bush was still alive, and he gave John Meacham a lot of his time, as did his family. Now, this is not authorized. He wasn't asked to do it. But I had this sense throughout it that he did feel, John Meacham, that because the family had given so much of his time, it was very difficult for him to be critical, because even when he was critical of the Bush presidency, I felt like it immediately bounced back. And there is this sense that George H.W. was the last of an old guard of presidents who came from families obsessed with noblesse oblige. It was their job to serve, and that he was like the last of a generation. And so that kind of sensation that when young Bill Clinton showed up, he just like wrecked a bunch of the institution. And I don't know that John Meacham feels that way, but I did kind of get the sense that we were supposed to feel some sort of grief for the loss of this last noble generation of selfless American servants. I don't know. I'm totally off in the weeds here on some weird psychology trip. But I felt, again, so attached to George H.W. Bush the person that it didn't occur to me until I was reading the epilogue that Meacham left stuff out. For example, the book itself deals almost not at all with the AIDS crisis, which is a major issue for both Reagan and H.W. Bush. But the epilogue is all about how, towards the end of his life, George H.W. Bush, I think he either officiated or attended a friend's gay wedding. So Meacham knows what he's done and what he has not talked about, but he tries to like make up for it at the end. Now, it's been a long time since I've read this book, so someone may come up in the comments and be like, actually, he does talk about the AIDS crisis. But like, for me, as I was reading, it was such a non-entity part of the book to then have that like epilogue slapped in my face. I was like, what? So I don't know. I don't know if a new biography is going to come out now that George H.W. Bush is no longer with us, that will feel confident in being a little bit more critical. I don't know. But the John Meacham felt really weird in some certain ways. And while I enjoyed it, and it was, again, eminently readable, it was a little... I have some questions. Skipping the aforementioned Bill Clinton because somehow it is incredibly difficult to find any book on him on audio that's not like one of those like Clinton dynasty, Clinton, blah, 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 like a legitimate biography. It's driving me crazy right now. Anyway, we're gonna skip over Bill Clinton and we're gonna head to the second Bush. This is George W. Bush, son of George H.W. Bush. And I read Bush by Jean Edward Smith. Now, I knew when I read this book that it was critical of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. But what I understood from the rest of what I read was that otherwise Jean Edward Smith is fair. Now, I am a registered Democrat. I am not a fan of George W. Bush, but when I understand the meaning of the word fair, I do not understand that to be a book that starts out with the line, "The American people have never been so underserved by a president as they were by George W. Bush." And you're like, okay, that's not fair, that's critical. Again, I'm not a fan, but Jean Edward Smith does not like George W. Bush. And she does give him credit where credit is due. She just does not believe that he's due much of it. So the other thing that was really weird about this, and full disclaimer, I'm filming this video really early. I'm going to use it as filler in case one of the arcs that I'm supposed to be filming doesn't get filmed on time. I'm filming this video on August 30th, which is the day the last plane has left Afghanistan, officially ending our 20-year war in the Middle East, started by George W. Bush. And so it's been really eerie and really weird to be listening to a book very invested in the beginning of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, almost more than any other element of his presidency. Hearing George W. Bush talk about why we started there, why we went into there, the things that were going wrong, the things the military was saying, hearing quotes from Karl Rove and Josh Bolton, and then like coming home and those same people now 20 years later are giving interviews and what they have to say like on the TV. And it's been a really just, I don't know if eerie is the right word, but it's just been a really interesting experience. And it makes this book for me really hard to review because this book and the implications of these decisions that were made and what these people had to say, it's just been so present. And so I recognize that I potentially made a mistake with my choice of book here, and the reading experience has just been really, really bizarre and really heartbreaking. It's been a really weird reading experience. Obviously, George W. Bush is something that I need to revisit. I just don't think I can revisit this right now. I think this has been a lot. There you go. That's how I feel about that. So that's episode 6 in the books. James Monroe, Carter, Reagan, Bush. I am currently reading a book on Gerald Ford. I'm, again, not happy with this selection, but I've really reached the point where I'm super struggling to get books on audio about the presidents that I have left, and I'm starting my PhD. So I'm not sure exactly how far away episode 7 is, but I'm hoping to get there you know, I don't want this to go another several years. I want to get there and just keep making, obviously, some supplemental episodes as that gets more interesting. So thank you for joining me for this. Sorry that my camera died in the middle. Let me know your thoughts and feelings. If you have some recommendations for some presidential biographies on audio, there are definitely plenty of presidents I would like to revisit, plenty of them that I haven't hit yet, although they are slowly creeping down towards single digits. Let me know. Thank you so much, guys. Bye.